Hi, KT. I just listened to your new podcast with Neil, Boomstick Mods. Great, by the way. Really enjoyed it. Quick thing that I noticed, though. His questions were so much f***ing easier! What the hell?
Hey, we're episode 32 this time, right?
Correct.
It's episode
yes.
32 this
yes,
time?
It is 32
Okay.
this time, yes.
That's great. Hello and welcome to episode 32 of the Foam News Collective podcast. I'm KT. I'm here with Vile, and pretty soon I'm going to be physically with Vile in the same space as we are traveling both to Maryland Mayhem this weekend. Really excited to be there. We're gonna be doing some coverage of the tournament on the first day. We're going to be in the HVZ, running around. We have those little separable brain tags that Boomstick has been making, so we're big targets, I guess.
I'm just gonna hide the whole time.
Are you packed? Are you ready?
I'm mostly packed. I have most of the stuff ready to go, so trying to make sure I'm going down my checklist of things.
I'm I'd say 50% there, but it's cool. I got a podcast to record and a show to edit. Today is Wednesday, the 17th of April. And so tomorrow is our travel day. So we are doing everything a day or two early for the Foam News Collective this week. And as such, if anything happened on Thursday and Friday, that's why we didn't talk about it in the show or in the podcast. Grimz might pop in later, but we do have a very special guest today. It is the extremely well-known hobby YouTube creator, designer, competitive player, event organizer, modder, and many other things, Drac. Welcome in. How are you this evening?
I am swell, fellas. Thanks for having me. Yeah, I don't know if anybody's ever listed it all off like that before. I guess you do something long enough and you wear a few different hats, eh?
Right. I mean, it is that way. It's well. I mean, I've only been doing this hobby for 4 years, like we were talking about before the podcast. And it's I can tick a decent number of those boxes. I'm not nearly as well known, but if you're into doing something, why not do it well and
taste all the taste, smell all the smells, wear all the hats. Why not?
Exactly. So one of the things that I always start with, I am fairly confident that everybody listening to this podcast knows who you are. But for the record, why don't you give the Cliff Notes version, give the elevator pitch.
Sure, the elevator pitch. Somebody catches you. What do you do for a living? Spiel.
Yeah.
So I'm in the extremely fortunate position of hitting the internet at just about the right time, right place. I am a very involved hobbyist foam flinger. Try not to say nerfer these days, but back in the day we were all nerfers. And I have a YouTube channel that's become relatively successful. And then through that, we've leveraged into consulting within the industry. So I do design and marketing consulting for a variety of different companies and corporations in the foam flinging space. And then, of course, that leveraged itself into just general industry consulting. So I run a small think tank collective, and we have a blast fabricating and solving problems for various entities.
That's really cool. It's neat to see how work inside a hobby like this can sort of evolve and open up new doors and opportunities. It was
definitely the most exciting part of the interview process after graduating at Tech was you'd get calls back or emails back and they'd be like, the Nerf guy. And I was like, that's very reductive, but, all right. And you realize that, they interviewed 20 computer engineers, but only one of them was like, yeah, I shoot people with toys who are slower and weaker
nice
than
to
me.
be known for something. I mean, we were talking about this before, Vile and I met in the chiptune scene before we re-encountered each other in Nerf. And for a long time in all my non-chiptune music circles, I was the chiptune guy. But it meant that I stood out and I got that first conversation. And so that can make a really big difference to do something kind of unique and do it well.
I didn't get to tell you guys did the chiptune modding around the same time that you were doing that. I was the definitive Zune mod guy.
Oh my god!
I noticed that yes, I have actually heard about this.
Let me tell you what that's worth in 2024. It's maybe half a ham sandwich to the right listener, but
That's funny. Oh, I forgot all
How
about
did Zune 2K go for you?
So it's crazy. I still know a few people from that world, and this has nothing to do with foam flinging, but it is fun to talk about. One of my personal hobbies that I would never discuss on the channel or otherwise is I actually love buying old Zune 30s off of eBay that are broken, and I still like to keep that part of my soldering and fabrication and tinkering sharp. And I love fixing people's quote unquote dead Zunes, and then I'll spend 3 or 4 days walking around with their Zunes that I bought off of eBay or one of the forums or something. And I like kind of this window, maybe it's like a voyeuristic thing or something, but they're these delightful little time capsules into people's lives where, you can almost plot and tell the moment that either the Zune died or they moved on to iPod or something along that, and it got thrown in a drawer and just disappeared, and then here we are.
Just via the music they were listening to at the time, or?
Well, I like listening to the music that they were into. Most of the time, they have no idea that they leave all of their photos on there if they were really into the Windows ecosystem. So I don't delete anything on them. I put a little sticky note on them. I'm like, this was a guy. He was about 20 years old. He was super into motorcycles. And then I have probably a box with about 40, 50 Zunes in it at this point that I've fixed and explored.
Interesting. I mean, people really do create their digital footprints and then just sort of scatter them to the wind.
Yeah, I mean, they just assume that they're gone forever, and I'm like, I would never do anything malicious with them. I'm not hunting these people down afterwards, but I think it's a delightful little museum of Dune that only I get to listen to.
That's cool. At the risk of verging dangerously off topic, I've bumped into a handful of digital camera cards and things that have some stuff on them. And generally, if I see people's pictures, I try to delete that stuff. But I see a lot of things that are someone took a short video of the ocean or a short video of something like that that's nondescript. And I've used a lot of that in video art when I'm doing quick videos for daily songs and things like that. So I love
Casey
that kind of stuff.
Neistat of you. Very cool.
Here, this kind of leans into a little bit of what I like to talk about on this podcast with a lot of our creators. When we get in front of the camera as YouTubers, we tend to be at least somewhat of a different person. We talked about this a bunch with Shalo, who of course is Captain Xavier, which is very distinctly a character, a named character. How much of Drac is Drac, and how much of Drac is a character, and where have you intentionally drawn that line somewhere, or is it just sort of a natural camera thing?
So I think I'm a really strange case for this question, because I'd love to tell you that it's a clean 1-2, the mask is on and I'm Drac, and then when I'm not, I'm some other guy. But the truth of the matter is that a lot of my closest friends I've made through this hobby, within this hobby, and so most people in my day-to-day life call me Drac. To them, I am Drac, etc. I'll tell you that I'm very different than a lot of content creators in that I have a face reveal in my repertoire, in my history books. When I started the channel, I was coming off of a pseudo dissertation at the time, and one of my primary sources for that dissertation was actually a book called Privacy Lost by David Holtzman. Fascinating book. The brief synopsis is this is a guy in the mid-aughts who's you don't realize how much of yourself you're about to give away on this newfangled internet, social media, tethered, web of things thing, and if you do it, you're never going to get it back. So be very, very careful how much of yourself you put on the internet, and, curate it as closely as you could. And I really, again, this was formative source material for me, and I took it to heart. And so when I started my channel, it was meant to be purely data. It was, this is how you fix a Zune. This is how you switch the battery. This is how you yada yada build a Master Chief helmet or whatever it was. And so I was very much a set of disembodied hands. I didn't have a face. I didn't have a head. I learned through this process that I had a a relatively novel cadence or sentence structure to my voice. So people started picking me out at events, being like, I'd be at an HVZ event at another campus and somebody'd be like, "You're the YouTube guy." And I'm like, "I don't know what YouTube is." And then I'd run off really quick. But I think
we wouldn't have anyone here who knows anything about that.
Not a clue.
Right, Vile?
No idea what you're talking about.
Vile has gone to great lengths, actually.
Yeah.
It's worth noting that I, a person who has known him for over a decade and who works and is effectively business partners, I have not seen Vile's face.
It's true.
Well, very exciting. So I think that on some level you'll be able to empathize with this being like a piece of myself that I thought was valuable and wanted to protect and keep. And then, through just the sheer, you can only go to so many corporate meetings wearing a leather helmet before you're like, I am ridiculous. I wish to be taken seriously and paid seriously. So eventually we did the face reveal, and that let me do a bunch of really incredible stuff. This is not a humble brag, but having a face reveal allowed me to start doing charitable efforts and pushes. It let me do Make-A-Wish. I mean, it let me stand in front of audiences of 4,000 people at stadiums, and I don't think that it would be possible to coordinate Endwar, without an identity attached to it. So in a lot of ways, I'm glad that I, stepped in front of the camera, but it's definitely something that I miss. It's something that I've certainly romanticized at this point in my foam flinging career. I often joke that I would hit the delete button on YouTube tomorrow if it meant that I could play 1 week-long game as nobody. And I really do firmly believe that. But it's also let me do a lot of good. I have no real regrets. But in the sense of the actual question, which is how much of Drac is me, Drac is definitely like the version of me that I built to be on the internet. And so in that ways, he's probably a little more self-confident than I am. That rubs some people in different ways. I think that's probably the biggest difference is he's very self-confident. He's a little more loquacious. But in general, like people meet me and they're just like, oh, like now that you're not on an 8-minute time schedule downloading as much toy information into my brain as you possibly can, you're just a guy. And I'm like, yeah, I never claimed to be anything but just a guy. Like, I'd love to hang out and, grab dinner after a battle. And frequently at the SENC, like, I'm the guy who grills food for people because I really like taking things at a much slower pace and getting to know people on their own terms. And I find that I'm a little more likable if I've just handed you a cheeseburger. So,
The confidence is a really interesting point because I've always thought that one of the strengths of the like, particularly the like review right? It's like the average person who watches your content is talking about reviews, right? And that's kind of like the thing that's been sort of the dominant force in our hobbies YouTube creation space. I do feel like that's finally starting to get a chip in it and start to shift a little bit, but that's a different topic. I've always thought that one of the strengths of your content was what you're essentially doing is very knowledgeable reactions to new products. Like you're giving a lot of experience and a long-term time in the hobby and applying it to this thing in a way that only a handful of people can do. Whereas Coop's style was very analytical and spent like a bunch of extra time behind the scenes and did all this stuff.
Coop was highly technical. There were versions. I mean, my version is very amateur from a production standpoint. I would be inclined to admit and agree. There's a lot of different content creators and takes out there. I mean, you mentioned Xavier, so I'll pick on him for a second. I mean, Xavier is a character. So he's got a couple of bits, right? And he'll pull it out. He'll do, a Diet Coop review. And then he'll be like, can it take a K26? And it's like, well, these days, who cares? But also, like, it gives people a baseline. And once you've picked a creator and a personality and you've kind of figured out, like, I identify on some level with this creator, I either really love them or I really hate them or their style of gameplay or what have you, then it almost doesn't matter beyond that because, you're watching somebody that you have a good size reference for and knowledge base for, experience a product so that you know whether or not it's something you want to buy or not. I think if I bring anything distinctive to the ecosystem these days, I mean, originally the thing that I brought to the ecosystem was just ubiquity. I mean, I would get every product. Right. I would drive wherever I had to go to get the product. And and make the content on it, and then I'd take it apart. These days, I think that what you're really buying into if you watch my content is you want to see somebody who is, undeniably a very competitive, fast-paced, snap-shooty style player who's handled, 1,000 of these things at this point, kind of give their hot take. And, I try to be very sensitive to that. I like to point out, I'm like, from a competitive perspective, this thing is garbage, or this thing is pretty slick. But then at the end of it, I'm like, if you're into cosplay, this is great for that. I've done some Nerf cosplays myself. Or if you're budget conscious in some way, there are a lot of blasters these days that are, definitely a B tier version of something else, but frequently they're 40, 50, sometimes $100 less than the Worker Seagull or what have you. And so,
and you talked about how this has changed over time. I mean, you've been doing this since you've been making videos since 2008, initially about the Zune, but getting into, we started to talk about this with Boomstick and didn't have time last episode. The YouTube game has changed so much. And it feels like, it's like I did the review thing for like a minute and I was like, it almost feels like there is less of a point to doing that now. They'll like catch every single blaster, try to be the first person doing it. Like YouTube likes to feed that algorithm, but they'll feed it for 1 or 2 videos.
Right.
Do you notice a change like in your metrics? Have you adjusted how you treat YouTube and how you handle that as a platform to try to meet that?
Oh man, we could do I could do a whole episode on this. But the cliff notes are obviously, there's some huge metric changes in the last couple years in general. But prior to that, there was a huge shift 5 or 6 years ago, and then there was I was making content pre-Google, and that was a completely different Wild West of content creation. That's a little less relevant to this conversation, but it's just worth mentioning that I would say, internet moves pretty fast, and we've probably been through, it's all been called YouTube, but we're probably on the 6.0 in terms of algorithm and how it rewards, how it feeds what it wants from you as a creator, how it punishes, which is something that a lot of people don't want to look into or discuss. And I'll say, I don't know if it's gotten better or worse. I think that there's short form content, vertical content is at this point the sociopsychology is out, right? It's undeniably, unequivocally bad for us. It is.
Yes.
It is not something that human brains are designed to absorb. It's addictive in a almost chemical way, in an actually chemical way, and as bad as it is for adult brains, it's terrible for children. And so, as somebody who understands that a large portion of their audience is, an adolescent, it's not as much as most people would think. Like, there are a significant portion of what I guess you would call adult fans of Nerf out there. But, I try to be sensitive to that. And I've always been like, I'm going to make technical, high vocab content for people who want to either buy better products or build better products. And, that integrity, that sort of guiding star has walked me through, YouTube 2.0, 3.0, 4.0, 5.0. And there's certainly things about the current ecosystem where it's like, okay, I made a zombie strikeout video and it did not perform very well at all. And so you have to ask yourself the question, you're like, why do I do this? I made this video, it didn't do very well. Should I stop making content like this? And I guess all I can say is, as opposed to some other creators, I'm in the very, very fortunate position where the YouTube channel is not my livelihood. So I can maintain that integrity. I don't have to adapt necessarily. More views would be great. The ability to, serve my audience better is wonderful, but I don't think that I'm in the position that I would have been in, let's say, 2012, where I'm trying to chase having the #1 Stampede mod video competing with 3 or 4 other goofs on the internet. Now I'm like, I make my content, it serves my audience, it reaches my audience most of the time, and if they get something out of it, great. But if that one's a stinker, I'm just going to move on to the next thing and keep working my way through.
Well, and a lot of our creators that have been around for a while have left. Most notably, probably Coop in the last year. Have you ever considered dropping this part of your oeuvre of what you're doing? Because you do have a lot of other things going on, and it can be kind of taxing.
I mean, there's on the good days, absolutely not. Right? When you get the message from the kid who's like, I've been watching your content since I was 12. I just graduated from university. I'd love to meet you. I'm coming to Endwar, blah, 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 blah. Or you get I got a guy who just interned at NASA and he's like, I never would have been here if it wasn't for like watching your videos. Here's, a photo of me working on blah, blah, blah. Don't send it to anybody. I'm not supposed to take this picture. Like, those are deeply satisfying and make it, it's all worthwhile at that point. But then you have, like hate threads on Reddit and discords about like, what's Drac doing right now? And it's like, I didn't sign up for that. I never wanted to be a public figure. And so on the bad days, you're like, I could just shut it down. Like, I don't necessarily have to do this. It's not who I am intrinsically, but luckily there's more good days than bad days.
Fair enough. Yeah, it's we came into doing this show with a very specific mission, and I think that sort of keeps us going through this. Like, every day is a good day if we're achieving our mission, and it's a lot easier to sort of push off a lot of the negative talk.
Sure.
We love constructive criticism that's given to us, but a lot of what happens to us is not personal. Whereas, when we're out there as individual creators, this is one of the things that's been great about being a collective.
Nobody has to take the bullet. That's pretty good.
We can kind of get together to discuss the bullet,
Yeah.
which is really great, and sort of like really try to figure out like, okay, is this something we actually need to be concerned about? 90% of the time, it's like, nah.
Yeah.
I would say that,
but if it is
90% of the time, it's people who are upset because they want a podcast that's on episode 32, or
right.
They think that they would do a better job of reviewing the blah blah blah, and half the time they're right. But if they're not actively doing that, then it's pretty easy to discount that as theory. I mean, very respectfully, and I'm thrilled, tickled always to have anybody from any walk of life attend Endwar or something like the SENC or anything along that line. But about once in Endwar, I'll get a dad, somebody who's like not a part of the hobby. They drove 4 hours. They brought their kid. They don't really get it. And they'll approach me at some point and they'll be like, what you could be doing different? And I'm like, man, I'm sure you got a lot of great ideas, and I appreciate that you're an accountant who's been doing it for 20 years and you're a very smart person who solves problems. But if you've never rented a university, please don't tell me what you think I'm doing wrong right now actively. Throw it in an email and we'll tackle it 2 days from now.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've run enough events to know how that feels. This is not the time. I'm trying to wrangle 200 people right now. Write it
200 would be easy. I'd love 200.
Yeah. Well, when I say 200, it's usually 200 kids with musical instruments. So.
Oh, goodness. Yeah, I mean, I don't think I could do that.
Speaking of Endwar, that's, of course, one of the big things we definitely want to chat with you about today. Endwar, just sort of all the details finally got announced. We've known that it was coming for a bit. Y'all teased it a little bit.
Love to tease. Yeah.
Yeah, and then dropped your release video recently. Would you, and part of this is for my benefit because I know about Endwar. I've been following its existence for a while, but how far back does it go? What's sort of the brief history of it?
So, I had to Google this my own self because I was like, what's going on? It's been a while. So Endwar is effectively just like a nationwide invitational. And to get you guys up to speed, the golden age of HVZ was probably like 2009 to 2012. That's when Walking Dead is the #1 show on TV and everybody wants to play the zombie game at college. I'm very, very, very lucky, very blessed that I got to play 50, 60 games of HVZ during that period of time, instilling just a lifelong love for the game in me. But then it started to putter out, and it got smaller and smaller, and a lot of campuses couldn't maintain a game, or maybe they ran out of moderators, or their old blood moved away, and all of a sudden nobody wanted to put in the work, or play zombie, or something along that line. And so in 2016, a guy who did a documentary called Thunderdome, a good friend of mine, Rob Lair, a fellow who's not explicitly worth mentioning, and I got together and we put together something called Nation versus Zombies. That would have been in 2016, and that was sort of an attempt to be like, okay, we've got all these fracture segments, but in every good HVZ community, there's a dozen or so people who really love the game. Let's put all of the people who really love the game, who are willing to drive 5-6 hours for something great, in one, unified collective, huge, super invitational. And the name Nation versus Zombies kind of implies that, right? Like anybody in the continental U.S. could come do this thing, and we'll have a huge celebration of the sport, of the game, of the hobby. We'll do like a miniature kind of talk and trade convention thing beforehand. And that was really the part that I focused on. I wasn't super involved in the game itself that year. But then, like any good collective, we figured out exactly what our collaborators' strengths and weaknesses were. And it ended up kind of dissolving. But in 2017, I kind of got together with the remnants of the Ohio crew up there. Ohio has an amazing scene, and we kind of all decided amongst ourselves, we were like, hey, if somebody's willing to fork over about $10,000, we could definitely save this thing. Was it worth doing? And we all hopped on a Discord call, not unlike this one, and we were like, it's absolutely worth doing. This was an amazing time. And I was looking at what was at the time a very profitable, very successful YouTube channel, and I was like, yeah, I love the game, X $1,000 worth. Let's do it. And so that would be the 2017, with the goal of kind of moving it around the country to keep HVZ alive, kind of inject the stimulus package into various kind of communities and organizations, because not everybody can drive 10 hours to Ohio, but maybe they can do it in the Southeast, or maybe they could do it in the Northeast, or something along that line. And then, the Rockies are a pretty large mountain range, so I think that one of the greatest successes of Endwar is actually sort of its offshoots, the things that it has spawned, the formula of convention, HVZ, tournament, invitational gathering has seen remarkable success. I mean, you see Ragnarok Oktoberfest springs up the year after on the West Coast, and that's just a terrific, tremendous event run by Jamie Heston over there. Then you've got Maryland Mayhem coming up this weekend, which is a phenomenal example of kind of that, again, real sort of would you call it a Midwest event? I'm not sure. Maryland's, on the coast.
No, it's pretty north. It's not quite like New England, but it's pretty north.
And then you have Foam Fest over in the UK doing an incredible job. Huge, their focus has always been like charitable organizations, children's mental health. Couldn't be more proud of Mel and Alan over there putting that together. It's nothing unique or... Sorry about that, fellas.
It happens.
It's it's an invitational, which we used to do all the time back when we had 200-person games on individual campuses. But now in a world where people struggle to get anywhere close to that domestically, it's nice. It's nice sometimes to see a real 400, 500-person zombie horde running towards you.
I think it's worth also mentioning PA Survival Fest, which is kind of on the rise right now. We've got, they're a little, I guess that's a little more Midwesty, right? I don't know.
I mean, it would be further west than Maryland, yeah.
Yeah.
Geographically.
It's more westy. But I hear they're doing great work, and it's been a really successful format ever since then. And the pressure sort of putting it on every single year, not every team can handle that, and we all had to kind of die off for the pandemic and are kind of making a return. Would you describe this year's theme? Because I mean, you just put that video out that did a great job of doing it, but
Sure.
I'm equally interested in this year's theme, and also just the changes that you've made to the event overall from last year, either reflecting the theme or just because
No, I mean, we
you
can certainly
things.
talk logistics. I think that's valuable. That's also, I mean, this podcast is a really great format to do that. An announcement video is a terrible way to explain, like, this is why we moved this way. We flipped this switch and turned this dial. But, I mean, at the end of every Endwar, we take in a ton of feedback. I'd say 80% of it is very productive. 10% of it is, Drac, we loved it. This is my family's summer vacation. It was amazing. We love you. We love, the campus. Everything was great. Keep doing what you're doing. And while that's wonderful and makes me feel good, please don't stop sending that feedback. It's also completely worthless. It doesn't do anything to help me improve the event for next year. There's another 10% that's like, Drac, we hate you. You smell bad. Everything about you is bad. We're never coming again. And I'm like, well, first off, you probably didn't come this year. But second off, thank you for your email. That's also completely worthless. But we compile all the stuff that's sort of in the middle that tells us, like, hey, I came. I really enjoyed this. I liked this about FoamCon. But, my team was really tired. We had to decide between, like, going hard for HVZ and going hard for Foam Pro Tour. And we decided that we wanted to win the money more, so we kind of eased off of the HVZ, but then we felt like we missed out on this and this and this. And that's the really valuable, like, this is a person who came, who participated in all aspects of the event, who experienced some amount of, like, thoughtfulness and reflection on the drive home, and then sent me something really valuable. And so we've been compiling that for years from every event. But there are definitely a few key changes to this year's event that stem almost exclusively from player feedback. Very little of it is logistical on my end. Logistics tend to hamper development. They don't move dials and switches. They just, take them off the board half the time. But, the decision to move Foam Pro Tour to before the HVZ is, I kind of alluded to that. It's that a lot of the players who are like diehard competitive, they feel like, they don't want to play as hard.
They want to put their best foot forward before they wear themselves out doing the
exactly.
They want
the
HVZ thing to be just chill, and they can just play to their energy level and not feel like they have to hold back or like get tagged early or go home if they become a zombie. They can just kind of run with the energy they have.
And I empathize with that because I'm a very competitively minded person myself. My original formula was that we were unsure if the kind of people who played competitive and like really wanted to be there for the competitive scene were the kind of people that were going to have the availability to be there on Friday. If Friday was a travel day for them, or if logistically that would work for them. And overwhelmingly, the feedback has been that, especially now that Foam Pro Tour is a more established entity, people know what they're getting into, what to expect. That they're like, yeah, man, I travel on Thursday. Like, I'm here for the full 3 days. And I'm like, okay, well, if you meet me at that level of commitment, then I'm more than happy to accommodate this in a way that benefits everybody. Another key piece of feedback is that there's really like 4 kinds of people. There are 4 quote-unquote customers that attend Endwar. And I won't bore you with the details of those, but like I have little profiles for them. And I think about those 4 people every time I make an Endwar decision. But anyway, one of those people is exclusively like they care about HVZ. They played HVZ in college. They want to share HVZ with their new significant other, or they want to relive that in some capacity. And so over the years, the feedback from that person specifically has been, I just want more HVZ. And so, expanding the game into 2 days, but removing Mission 0, it meets a lot of the safety concerns that myself, my staff, and the campus has had. It gives the people who want more HVZ more HVZ. It lets us drag the pace of play out so that it's not quite so condensed and is, difficult on vendors and what have you. This year's going to be a little bit of an experiment where, we've got some vendors, some personalities who also play competitively. And so now they're going to have to split their time between their booth and the tournament. And so I think that
was a problem that Maryland Mayhem had last year. But I also know that they had a lot of success with the competitive play first thing. And one of the really cool aspects of that was going to the HVZ. You see the competitive teams running together because at that point they're like all out. They're like, oh, if I rip my jersey, whatever, it doesn't really matter. Like, I'm just here to have a good time. I already know what happened yesterday. And people get to interact with them and be like, oh, well, that's the team that won. I want to be in their group in the HVZ because I want to run with them. It creates a lot of really cool situations like that.
And that's, that's the goal, right? Like, people are like, what's the point of Endwar? And the point of Endwar isn't for me to throw away a tax-deductible loss every year. The point of Endwar is to create as many, wonderful memories within the hobby for these people who frequently only get to see themselves, or each other, rather, once or twice a year these days, so that they get to have those, like, yeah moments. And whether that happens at the tournament or it happens in Mission 3 or, wherever that happens, like, I just want to foster an environment where, all 4 of those people, quote unquote, who attend Endwar for various reasons, I want to make sure that I give them as many opportunities to, that was really cool, as I possibly can. And that's something that we have to constantly remind ourselves as game organizers, our moderators, as volunteers. And then ultimately, you kind of have to remind the players of that as well. Like, I think that when you build up something as big as Endwar or an invitational in your heart and mind, and you commit to it and you drive to it, you have a tendency to take it very seriously. And, I'm certainly guilty of that personally in various aspects of my life, but especially outside of the Foam Pro Tour. I think that it's really important to remember that HVZ is a 2-part game, that you have to be very grateful to the zombies for creating these exciting moments for you. You have to try and play as, fair and fun-focused as you possibly can. Nobody ever remembers, like, they don't walk away from Endwar and they're like, that guy was the fastest, strongest, bestest shooting human player ever. That guy is a god. But they do walk away from it being like, that guy was so nice. He, shared his magazines with my son. Like, that guy was awesome and created a really wonderful event for the people that I came with. He didn't yell at my team or scream at anybody. He, he was a good leader, et cetera, and so forth. And, as long as we kind of keep that in the front of our mind, that, like, we are here to have these wonderful moments to create this excitement and this storytelling aspect, I think that everybody has a much better time. I'm fond of, especially in the last 2 or 3 Endwars, saying, like, you'll get the experience that you set out to have. It's very self-fulfilling. The people who show up and they're like, I want to have an amazing time playing HVZ. I'm going to be a research scientist and I'm going to goofball my way through this campus and it's going to be a blast. And if I get tagged, I'm going to be a goofball zombie. Those guys have the weekend that they wanted to have, and they leave with a big smile on their face. It's the people who show up and they're like, I'm going to be the greatest HVZ player of all time. When I was 19, I could run a 5-minute mile, and I am the Uberman. Those guys frequently get a reality check because now they're 30 and they haven't run a mile in a long time. And, but what was the question? Where are we at? I love Endwar. We've made some changes.
It's fine. This is perfect. This is perfect because I want to, first of all, hey, Grim.
Hello.
Welcome in. I want to pivot and talk more in a little more detail about the competitive side, about Foam Pro Tour, which we mentioned this year. And I specifically wanted to ask what you think about the meta this year. This is something I really want to encourage discussion of more because I don't think we really have enough. Like this dart shooting thing is becoming more of a serious competitive sport, and I think more people are just starting to recognize that. But we don't have a lot of like public media facing discussion about the actual like strategy meta. And one thing that I've been thinking about a little bit, there's a strong relationship between play and gear. It's ultimately about the people, but we have seen a lot of evolution, particularly in flywheelers this year. B cars are extremely common now and function with flywheelers, which was not really a thing so much as last year. Brushless blasters are way more accessible. How do you sort of expect the gameplay to change from last year's competitive season to this one?
So I'm going to put on my game organizer hat here, and I think I'm going to disappoint you, so I'll apologize in advance.
No.
But I think, how should
My
I
goal
phrase
is
this?
to hear what you think. So if you tell me what you think, I am not disappointed.
Right. So I want to phrase this very carefully, because I think that a huge issue with the growth and endorsement of the competitive scene is that we, in our capacity as game organizers and prize supporters or anything along that line, like if we want to be taken seriously by the outside world, at least in terms of sport and integrity, we have to take ourselves very seriously. In a lot of ways, this is my cardinal sin in the competitive world, is that sometimes I do take it very, very seriously, almost too much so. But, I have a huge background in tournament organization and a lot of rules lawyering, et cetera, and so forth. But I almost don't want to weigh in on what I think or believe or want the meta to be, because I feel like I'm in not a unique, but certainly a very privileged position where I design a field and a game, and then I give away thousands of dollars to the best players in our hobby. And I think that if I were to hop in any sort of public forum and be like, this is what I think the coolest blaster is, and this is the style of gameplay that I want to reward or see succeed the most, I think that it both fuels...
You don't want to give people the idea that you're dropping hints about
right.
what
And
you
I mean,
expect
I think
people
that
to do on your field.
If I put a disclaimer on it, then certainly, and I would be more than happy at any point to comment on other competitive matches. But, with Foam Pro Tour being so close, coming up very quickly, and, the nature of Foam Pro Tour has always been like, I believe firmly that the best players are the best players with any gear, on any field, in any team. Like, they will solve problems quickly. I think that the ability to look at an arrangement and an opponent and tackle it dynamically is what makes you a truly great athlete, regardless of whether you're playing baseball, basketball, poker, or Nerf. And I think that it would be disingenuous to the fragile nature of our hobby right now. For me, as the guy who's giving away the most money to competitive players, to come out and be like, I think that flywheels are the best thing, and this is how they should play.
Right.
The truth is, I don't really want to influence that.
I get that. I understand that. It's more, and I respect you not wanting to weigh in on that. That makes perfect sense to me. It's more a question just of sort of like how the hobby and how play styles evolve. And if any of the other hosts want to offer their thoughts on this, you're welcome to as well. How the game is sort of evolving, and we are in sort of a unique position where a lot of other competitive sports, the equipment doesn't not change at all, right? Like every year, football players have new shoes and like the field materials
new
change
sneakers, new
stuff.
pads,
but
but
we are uniquely affected by the evolution of our equipment.
I mean, we're almost like racers sport. In a way. Like there's a very rally-esque sort of like, I like using this analogy sometimes, and I definitely feel this way about my personal competitive gear and loadout. Like when you get rear-ended on the highway, you don't hop out and you're like, you hit my 2009 Honda Civic. You jump out and you're like, you hit me.
Right.
And I think that, race car drivers, nerfers, various other hobbies and sports, like we identify very strongly with our gear in almost like an identity of things sort of way. And I think that that's something very beautiful, very unique about our sport. It's something that I love. I have tremendous respect for players who play with exclusively gear that they made. They're not always the best players, but it is, shout out to Eli in California. Plays with his own gear. It's very high level. He's a tinkerer and a player. Is he the best pilot of his latest gadget? Certainly not. But, I think that unity between like maker and competitor is an incredible thing and really, really cool to watch pop off when it does happen.
A couple of more detailed questions about Foam Pro Tour. One, when do we expect to see rules drop this year? That's been a thing that's come up in previous years, and I know that it's so hard to put those rule books together. But I see folks asking.
Right. No, it's a very reasonable question. I highly anticipate that we're just going to copy paste the rule set from last year into this year. Something that I really like about the hobby in terms of its competitive space right now is that we have, 3 or 4 different game types, all of which I think have individual merit to them. For example, like I love the 5v5 over King of the Hill, Koth. I love it from a commentator. I love it from a video perspective. I love that it lasts, the full duration of the match regardless. Like you tune in and you're going to get 5 minutes of gameplay. And I think that that's terrific. I think that there's a lot of gameplay revolving around that like as a player, I don't necessarily love. I, think that it creates hiccups, but I really do enjoy that it's 5 minutes of more or less very fast-paced play. I wish it was a little more definitive, but I'm sure that fans of that would say that they love that it can be upset, that it can be turned around, that there are comebacks, et cetera, and so forth.
Well, and every tournament event already sort of has, their own different variations on that, and I assume those are selected largely based on the predilections of each organizer. But as long as the game type is fair,
Yeah, of course, and tournament integrity is. If you have tournament integrity, you can run any rule set you want because again, the best players are going to adapt to the game type as it is delivered to them. And, at least in the current state of competitive, I don't think we have any bad faith actors. I haven't caught anybody tweaking the FPS dial on their FDL after I count their darts or anything along that line. I think that we're still in the infancy and we all sort of understand that we have to play nice to get there. But the thing that I really like about Sin Zone is that it's very refined for quick, decisive. It rewards it rewards you solving the problem faster than your opponent. And in that sense, we have games that, they are under 30 seconds occasionally. And it was always designed to kind of push towards inaction is an action, and inaction is frequently wrong. Like you should be choosing to do something on the field at all times. I'm not going to claim even remotely that it's a perfect system, but when the right teams and the right gear and the right field layout shows up with the good weather, it's definitely my favorite way to see the sport played.
Makes sense. Are you the one that ultimately makes the decision on the game type, or how big of a committee do you have doing that?
There's definitely a team of people who help me with Endwar. It is not a one-man show.
Yeah. I just specifically mean about like the game rules and Foam Pro Tour.
So, I think so. It's not quite so cut and dry, but I mean, certainly in terms of who wrote the Sin Zone rule setup, that was me. And then the revisions that have been made to it along the way have also been me, and that's coming from the perspective of somebody who referees all of the matches on the sideline and is like, I like what I'm seeing, but I really don't like this, so I'm going to fix it.
Makes sense.
And it's always been kind of an effort of I want players to make dynamic actions quickly and then be rewarded for those actions. And I think that I've refined it to a point that at least, right now, April 17th, 2024, I'm pretty satisfied with. And so I don't foresee making any major rule changes to the Sin Zone rule set prior to this year's competitive season. There are a lot of things not a lot of things. There are a few things that could change that. We have theoretically a locked-in location for the Foam Pro Tour this year at UNCC. I'm really excited that weather should not be a factor for it, but I have not personally laid eyes and feet on that field yet. And so if I get there and, I run the test game a week before and it's just dog water, then, we might have to make a change. My biggest concern right now is that the field might not be large enough for the layout that I want to implement. And if that doesn't end up working out, then we won't do it. There's also an element of safety to be taken into account. Certain floors are just not conducive to our sport, and I would hate for our athletes to get injured, especially needlessly. There's an element of personal liability in any sporting endeavor, but where you can, I think it's your responsibility as a game organizer to put, the best possible environment out there for your players.
Absolutely. Speaking of how this is making decisions from year to year, and I got people who are going to be angry if I don't ask you about this. Dart Zone Pro Tour was such a specific thing that happened. What was sort of the result of that collaboration on how the tour, like, did you wind up changing anything from that you liked that wound up sticking with the event, or was it like really kind of a one-off on its own thing with the collaboration with Dart Zone?
I mean, I think that if you walk away from something that grandiose, that ambitious, and you didn't learn anything, you should probably just hang it up entirely. So there were definitely a lot of lessons from there. The portion of your audience that would be upset with you for not mentioning it wants to hear me say something along the lines of like, "Oh, it was a failure. We'll never do it again." But that portion of your listeners are, I think, if they searched inside their heart, they'd realize that they're kind of poor sports, maybe a little sour grapes over the whole affair. The truth is that the Dart Zone Pro Tour was a very ambitious collaboration with a very generous sponsor that I would consider both a success and a failure in many different capacities. It was a success in that it was a real steroid shot in terms of like overall hobby awareness of competitive play. Right or wrong, like it got it onto a lot of people's radar. It was a success in the sense that it put over $20,000 into the pockets of competitive players and teams and organizations that is still, paying dividends and keeping people in practice and lighting that fire that perpetuates to today and gets people at tournaments competing. I think it's a huge failure in the sense of our sport was not tailored to a professional, quote unquote, live streaming rig. I think that and admittedly, like the completely outside entity that Dart Zone hired to cover the event really did not do any homework. We had some exploratory meetings where they let me know a lot of things that they did not end up providing. For example, I think that we're far enough away from this that I can very respectfully, because, they brought a staff of 8 people. They worked really hard. But, they promised me instant replay. They were unable to deliver that in any capacity. They did not think that it was going to detract from my ability to referee personally. It absolutely did. I didn't get to referee at all that day, which I think was very challenging, that the entire player base was used to qualifiers where, I personally refereed, set up each match, etc. And then all of a sudden at the most important and pivotal point of the event, I'm a colored commentator. I think there were some serious wake-up calls on the side of the sponsor where they had to realize that there are some things that you can do with your money that are absolutely beneficial to the hobby, but there are definitely some things that players don't appreciate or enjoy. And there are a lot of things that people did not like from that tournament that have not been repeated since. So in the capacity that we took it as an opportunity to, grow our understanding of player expectations and reward them better, I think that we did a great job. The tournament last year was cleaner, simpler, faster, easier. It didn't have a live stream set up outside of what Andrew did, which was terrific. But I never even saw that coverage necessarily. And then I turn around and I see how RAG is handling their 5v5 coverage. And, I'm green with envy. I think that they did an amazing job. They had actual hobbyists who were not directly involved in the competition commenting on the event. They had pause breaks. They were using real hobbyists who had an innate understanding of the flow of the tournament to create their breaks in the production and synthesizing. And I just, everything that I saw about that, I was like, wow, this is amazing. And it's crazy to me that we suffered at the hands of trying to do something so greatly when the answer was in our backyard the entire time.
Well, and Maryland Foam Tournament's gonna have World Foam Alliance doing commentary and doing a stream, which I'm really excited to see. Sort of a similar idea. You've got people inside the hobby sort of handling these things, because we're lucky with a hobby like this that we have people who are comfortable in front of a camera, comfortable on a microphone, comfortable responding to things in real time, creative, funny, like sort of have all these skill sets already. And so I think that's a really, really great point. And I do think, as you were saying, sort of that segment of the audience, like it's important to understand that large events like this have learning curves, and it doesn't matter how good you are at what you're doing. If you're doing it for the first time, you're gonna learn stuff.
No, I mean, I sincerely empathize with the dozen or so people who, the event did not meet their personal expectations, and then they, did not walk away with the feelings that they thought that they were going to experience of either victory or exuberance or something along that line. I mean, we created a very high stakes, very punishing tournament structure in order to accommodate the live stream. The most important part from a game organizer's perspective, and I've said this ad nauseum, is that the tournament was fair. The rules applied equally. And then most importantly, the best teams won. I think that if anybody wants to argue that point, they can come on the podcast and figure out how they want to jump through those hoops themselves. But unequivocally, the teams that practiced the hardest for the game type as they understood it prevailed. And so from a game organizer's perspective, I mean, I feel like I handed huge checks to the right players, and I feel really good about it.
We actually had a trivia question related to this in the last episode. So if anyone's wondering about that, you can go back to episode 31. So, okay, we should move on to, and Grim and Vile, you've kind of gotten pushed out of this one, so far.
It's very good to listen to.
Would the two of you read some of the questions that we have from our Ko-Fi supporters? One of the things that we allow our Ko-Fi supporters is to ask our podcast guest questions, and they gave us, I think, some great ones here. And it's worth noting, whichever of you wants to read these first. The second one is the one from the raffle winner, so I'll explain that when we get.
I can actually start with the first one. So from Iron Gopher. Of the myriad of products made available on Foam Pro Shop, I was particularly fond of the Horizon Strife Cage. Why was it discontinued?
I'm embarrassed to say that I promote the products on Foam Pro Shop. I own Foam Pro Shop. I run it. But that's a really good question for Ray, my shop manager. I think that the answer to that is that we were printing the Horizon Cage in ABS. Largely to handle the heat from things like fangs and our wheels. But we still have the wheels. We still have an ABS printer. If we're no longer selling that, it either fell off to the point that it wasn't worth keeping the file on the printers, which I have a hard time believing if you care enough about it, send in a question about it. This is one that I'm more than happy to take to my team on our All Hands Monday and be like, hey, we still have all these wheels. We should be selling Horizon cages. What's the deal there? And if the answer really is just like, we stopped printing in ABS and the bin ran out of inventory and we didn't Kanban card it hard enough, then that's embarrassing and we should get it back in stock for you. I'm super sorry about that. Thanks for supporting the shop though. Appreciate it.
That is the power of being a Ko-Fi subscriber to the Foam News Collective. So if you also want to be able to affect what retail stores in our hobby do, go sign on. Speaking of which, though, if you still want to ask our podcast guest questions and you aren't able to support us on Ko-Fi and you're in our Discord, the one time that I at everybody every 2 weeks is when I put up the raffle for the person who wins an opportunity to ask a free question of our next podcast guest based on our current guest's ability to answer trivia questions. And this next question is from the winner of the last one, Spance, with a 4 instead of an A, who I now have met in DMs because this was the first time I had encountered them. But Grim, you want to read this question?
Sure. What is the best advice you can give about lifebow battery usage to people who are scared of them?
I could give like a funny answer, which is like, do you own or rent? How much do you like your landlord? If you're a renter and you don't like your landlord, what do you really have to lose? No. I mean, house fires are no joke. I'm playing. The real honest to goodness answer here is that I'm not necessarily the guy. I mean, I have the degree background to tell you how you could handle lithium safely and how a balance charter is going to change your whole reality and how you should have a fire safe bag anytime you travel with it, blah, 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 blah. But the truth is that, I'm not the first one to tackle this. And I'm not going to be the most comprehensive, and I'm certainly not going to be able to do it in an audio-only format half as good as, Luke has an amazing...
I was going to say, Luke's guide, the Out of Darts guide to doing lipos is possibly the best one. And one of the reasons that it is because they sell lipo batteries. So they have every reason to do the best possible job they can explaining the safety matters behind them. So I definitely recommend checking out the Out of Darts video on lipo safety. The other thing that I always explain to people too is when you're understanding risk assessments, there's more than one aspect to a risk assessment. There's the likelihood of something happening, and there's how bad that thing is to happen. And with lipos, I think a lot of people don't understand that the likelihood of having a problem is actually quite low. I think people think that the likelihood of your battery catching on fire is super high. The real issue is if it does catch on fire, it's usually very bad. I
mean, I think that's sort of the catch-22 in anything, right? I mean, the rough equivalent here is like, hey, there's a 0.2% chance that, somebody shoots you in the chest. Are you still going to go to, whatever it is? And it's like, well, that's low, but also it's life-endingly devastating.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I think that, having all of your belongings immolated is pretty close. So I understand some of the apprehension here, but by and large, almost all lipo failure is not manufacturer, it's user error, it's that you tried to charge it in a way that you shouldn't have more times than not, or you tried to discharge it in a way that you shouldn't have.
Right.
So I think that watching that video, taking 10 minutes of your life and getting your knowledge up is the best way to, remove that fear. It's the same way that and we could get on a bunch of tangents, and I feel like I've been way too talkative. If I'm talking over anybody, somebody mute me. Fugu is delicious, and everybody's like, oh my God, I would never eat fugu. 8 people died in the last 10 years. And then you realize that none of those people were licensed sushi chefs with a license to do fugu. It's always like some guy who thought that he would impress his guests at a Christmas house party, and he was going to do it himself, and he doesn't really know what he's doing, and he killed all of his friends.
That's really what I'm getting at is if the potential damage is so high, but the likelihood is small, and the more you teach yourself and the more you learn, the smaller that likelihood gets.
Absolutely.
And that's really the way that you decrease the fear and the concern when you're handling something like a lipo battery, which, when treated correctly, is perfectly safe. But the risk of something, you can shrink it even more as long as you are well educated.
I think save for the one time that I've heard of it happening from someone. I think the only times I've ever even known lipo failures to happen, they completely went quietly. They just stopped charging one day. The lipo thing just stopped charging them, and then they didn't do anything. They just became a brick, and then you discharge it, you do your due diligence, then you can toss them. But,
yep.
I mean, this isn't life advice necessarily, but I think that your vape is assembled in such a way that it is far more dangerous than any sort of professional hobby-grade lipo.
Absolutely, and Taffy's got their one wheels. Those things have a history too. Ghost asks, as a proud new member of the SCNC and the Atlanta Blaster Club, I am starting to find that southern weather seems to affect how blasters perform, especially humidity. How do you compensate for changes in weather when choosing loadouts?
What a terrific question. Welcome to the Dirty South. Proud legacy here in terms of very competitive foam flingers in the southern corridor. So I guess I'll give you a brief story and then I'll tell you the solution. So there was a solid 2 years where we just absolutely dominated up at APOC, which is the big Northeastern War. And we made a lot of old hats look very silly because we were making some of the best darts, and we had a specific foam to barrel fit for our darts. And a big part of playing old school NIC is the ability to scavenge darts either off the field or out of your pouch if the round goes deep, and then fire them back at your opponents. And so our ammo was so good, but the issue was that foam swells in heat and humidity, which it sounds like you've already experienced, Ghost. The trick is to have either multiple barrels to compensate for that throughout the day, or what I've seen other competitive teams do, which is very interesting to me, as Southeast Nerfers, SE and Seers, we would take multiple barrels up to APOC, and as the day got hotter and sweatier and the darts swelled up, we would just switch our barrels or our hopper setups as time went on so that we could continue to shoot our foam the way that we were used to. If you're consistently playing in one ecosystem, you really ought to be okay. But I've seen people over on the California side store their competitive darts in coolers. Now, the coolers don't have any particular cooling element necessarily in them. It's just about keeping them in a humidity-controlled, heat-controlled environment so that they stay consistent throughout the day. Obviously, once you take them out on the field and fire them and they cook for an hour sitting out in the grass, I think all bets are off there. But I thought that was an interesting other solution. So either mate your barrel to your darts and plan on expanding up one size as the heat of the day takes over, or try the cooler method. I thought that was really novel. I've never done it myself, but it's pretty neat.
That is really clever. Living up where I do, we have wild swings in humidity and temperature from one part of the year to another, and I always am trying to account for that when I'm testing stuff or reviewing stuff or whatever. The way that this, I wish I could be here's my review of this thing's performance in the winter. Here's the review of the performance in the summer, because it's a totally different monster unless I spend a lot of time making adjustments.
Right, finagle with it. It was pretty amusing watching Jay Lego try and fire Southeast slugs out of his hopper.
I was just thinking about the percentage of our audience who heard you say making the best darts and may have to Google.
That's true. Yeah, once upon a 7 years ago, Ma and Pa fought for some.
Yeah, I have a couple Steffens that I keep around just to show people as examples, because people have questions about that all the time.
Once upon a time.
Yeah. Who wants to read the last question?
I could take it.
Go for it.
So Colin, also Go Slow Taco, as someone who has been in this hobby, what do you think it would take for foam flinging to thrive into the future? How much of it falls onto the major brands and how much of it falls onto the community?
What a multifaceted, and I know Colin very well at this point, so I appreciate him lobbing up, I guess, a soapbox for me to step up on. Thanks, Colin. What a wonderful and multifaceted question. So I firmly believe that it's a two-pronged approach. I think that, whatever you want to call foam flinging to thrive, and that means different things to different people. For some people, that's just having a regular group of 20 people to play with consistently. For some people, that's, they want $20,000 in prize support for their big tournament every year. So, your definition of that might vary, but in terms of how much of it falls onto major brands and how much of it falls onto the community, I'm gonna sound a little bit like what would you call it? A shill, a sellout. I'll put on my Bobololo hat. I think that the community is doing just about everything we possibly can to grow the hobby. I mean, we have community members driving engagement for events. We have community members generating content like this podcast, like Facebook groups. I've seen Nerf TikToks, et cetera, and so forth. I mean, I think that we're very aware of what we're doing. But the fact of the matter is, in terms of people who buy toy blasters, we are such a tiny drop in the bucket, so minuscule in terms of the overall category. Would be people who buy more than 4 things a year, which is most people listening to your podcast would buy 4 or more, whatever you want to call it, in category products. That's a tiny percent of customers for the brands that are working on this thing. So, on some level, it's incredible that we've garnered the attention that we have. And I think that something that we could do as a hobby in that regard is two-pronged. I think that we take ourselves very seriously, and sometimes we should, but I think that we often forget with our newfound expertise and our years of experience what it's like to be a newcomer into the hobby. And so we should be very, the children are the future, but we should be very fostering, very encouraging to new players in the hobby. We should share our gear. We should share our knowledge freely. We should, do our best to create those moments of wow or that was cool that get people to continue to invest their time and energy into that good feeling so that they keep supporting the hobby. But also, we have a really awful track record in terms of like how do we as a hobby react to major sponsorship of our world from outside entities. And maybe we're just fiercely protective, and I can empathize with that. As somebody who's a little gatekeepy from time to time, it's my cardinal nerd sin is I'm like, you didn't read Dune, you don't know that. But I try and be as welcoming as I possibly can be in terms of the Nerf hobby. And our responsibility to major brands is, I mean, we have failed so completely every time they've offered us up a bone, and it's really heartbreaking as somebody who walks both worlds to be like, hey, you should support this thing. It's really cool watching, Hasbro, Dart Zone, Zuru, anybody go in with cold feet because they're like, the average consumer is very engaging with their content, but it's always the enthusiasts who are like, Nerf sucks now. You haven't made anything good in 5 years. And like, I'm just as guilty of it as other people, but I try really hard now that I've, grown up a little to be like, I understand why Hasbro is only doing reskins, but, then they come out and they do something cool. And we don't reward that or celebrate that in the way that we could. Earlier in the podcast, you're like, what's the number one takeaway from the Dart Zone Pro Tour? And I can tell you that they weren't thrilled with the way that people reacted to it. It hasn't happened again. I did my best to sort of smooth things out and make sure that they continued to interact with our world in a positive and encouraging way. And they certainly still do. I mean, they're attending conventions and they're sponsoring our events in a much smaller capacity, but they have not thrown that kind of prize support down or that kind of engagement towards our events in a very long while.
That's a very real thing. I think a lot about how I think a lot of the content creators, we have more of an outsized impact on, even though our specific hobby, like you say, is a very small percentage of the people actually buying product. Some of our content creators have an outsized impact, I think, on public perception on a lot of this stuff. And I think on some level, we don't realize our power, which extends beyond our actual purchasing power in some ways.
Yeah, our personal purchasing power, or even our personal opinions. I mean, I think that if the question is,
go ahead,
how much of that falls onto major brands and how much of it falls onto the community, I think it would be wonderful to see major brands support the growth of the hobby space. But I think it would be disingenuous to say that we haven't seen them attempt that in multiple forms. And across the board, each time they've done that, we've really stuck our noses up and been like, we can do better this way, that way, however. And we never really gave them the same opportunity or encouragement that we would give, let's say, a 13-year-old showing up to his first monthly meetup game. We expect so very much from these major brands, and, we don't really ever give them the same opportunities to grow, develop, etc. And as such, it's hard to blame them when they're like, all right, like, we'll go back to making jolts.
It's frustrating to me. I've watched some of these, and this goes to content creators as well as people in just, say, Discord's hobby, wherever, Reddit, it doesn't matter where it's at. You see companies like, say, actual Hasbro throwing out the Strife X, and everybody wants to crap on it and go, God, what is this piece of trash? And when people from the hobby were actually, had their hand in the creation of this, and they picked a platform that was really good, and when you priced out what it would be to build a Strife to the same capacity of that, and it's the same price, if not slightly more, and that's not even including getting into the batteries that you have to do, and they include a battery that is safe, this isn't made for a lot of those who are into the tournaments and in so heavily and deep into the hobby. It's not really made for that, right? It is made as sort of the good entry level for people to start finding this hobby. Maybe they saw this and they were like, wow, that looks really cool, and they want to come in. And like you're saying, we would accept them in, but then we turn around and we're very vocal and we're very open, and we trash talk and we beat them down, and we constantly try to tell them that they're trash for what they're trying to do because they're not appealing, or they're not
Well, I
they're
mean,
not- it's
not
frustrating
to-
to see because again, it's such a these companies have tried on multiple occasions. If you don't like it and you're in this hobby and you're so heavily invested, like a lot of us are, all you got to do is not buy the product. That's it. Like, you really don't have to buy the product. If the product is great and it got somebody else into the hobby that may not have ever bothered, that's perfect. Now you can get that person in here and you can
Yeah, you
talk to
can
that
work
person
them
and you
up to
can
your
work with them.
level and bring them up to your
Yeah.
level of knowledge, and the next thing you know,
Exactly.
they're building their own $300 Strife. But
Right.
we have a really negative feedback loop when we attack these new, chances, opportunities, etc. Because not only are we, making the company feel like, well, we're never going to do that again. Whoops. But
Well, so with the caveat that I agree with you, and I
Yeah.
absolutely see this pattern. I agree. I think also though about situations like Dart Zone's. I say Dart Zone. It's really
Omnia?
Primetime / Easebon's attempt to copyright trademark the term Dart tag. And I know that obviously it's not the same people designing the Nexus Pro X and trying to copyright or trademark a term like that. But when you have missteps like that alongside legitimate attempts to like interact with our hobby, it makes it harder to convince
is that
people.
still the overall perception of that? I mean, I'm just
That is the overall perception. That is largely because I mean that's what's on paper, and there was never like an official statement about it.
I guess all I can say about that, because I don't want to speak for any relationship that I might be privy to. I'd love to, if you guys have ever gotten Brian Hoffer on the podcast. I think that he had a really good conversation and take, and that he and I had to talk about it. But without overstepping or speaking about anything that I shouldn't necessarily reveal, that is such a, in my personal opinion, that is a categorically bad take on that situation. And I guess I'll just leave it at saying that like that move was originally developed as a preventative and protective measure, certainly not anything antagonistic or profit driven.
Yeah.
And then when they realized that it was being received in the way that I guess it was received, I think, they did absolutely what everybody expected or wanted them to do and dropped it.
Totally. And I mean, I personally am not going. I appreciate if that was the intent behind it. I know that I personally am not interested in trusting even like I want to have a good relationship with these large companies, and I want those companies in the hobby to be able to support each other. But I don't necessarily think that is the right approach to protect terms like that. And I think a lot of people look at it that way. There have been so many situations. I've seen situations in other hobbies where a company trademarks a term like that's in popular public use, and they say, "Oh, we're not going to persecute anybody who tries to use it," but then the company changes hands and the trademark still belongs to them, and leadership changes and opinions change. And
We see that with Dungeons and Dragons and Chris Cox and everything that's going on.
That is the classic example. Yes.
Hasbro, absolutely. I mean, I see how it's a slippery slope, and I'm not trying to defend or what would you call it?
Well, no, I see what you're saying now. I don't know how many people. I know that when we tried to report on this, we tried to make it clear that it was not like an antagonistic move by Primetime, but at the same time, it's still scary, I think, for people who see something that is a part of our hobby potentially becoming lost. So I understand people feeling that way. It's just very challenging, I think, to communicate the sort of legal intricacies and the
Sure, I mean, it's also, I mean, we're talking about
and
a highly nuanced thing that, I think is a specific example, but, ultimately we could take it in a completely different direction. We could say that while, we should be nice to the companies that support hobby-based endeavors, we should also hold the companies accountable for good product. I was going to mention the Omnia and just say that, I mean, they released a product that had a pretty clear injection molding error to it. I think that, once I took apart my sample, which worked fine, because it was a pre-production model that was sent to me for free, and then I took apart a commercially available one, and I was like, oh, well, one of these has flash where it shouldn't, and that's, leading to this accuracy issue. I think that if we hadn't, been as vocal about that as we were, it might not have led to the revision of what is ultimately now a pretty well-received product that a lot of introductory foam flingers are like, yeah, I like my Omnia. But, so there's a fine line between, like, we should hold companies accountable for bad product versus good product, but we should also, celebrate their desire to engage with us in a positive way, as opposed to, punishing them for every new endeavor explicitly.
I'm going to greedily final thought this conversation with the reminder that companies are companies, but people work for companies. And when we're talking about a blaster design, they were affected by many rungs of management and middle management that told them to do certain things, but ultimately they were designed by human beings. And a lot of times you'd be surprised to find out how many of those human beings are also a part of our hobby. So it's important to be aware of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's time to move on to our trivia game. This is something that we've been doing for a handful of episodes. Before this, Drac, if you're not familiar with our back catalog of podcast episodes, we started out playing a game that we called... what did we call
What's
it?
that blaster?
We called it... What's that blaster? We did this thing where we would look up, one person on the team would look up an obscure blaster and read just the official Hasbro description of it, and everyone else would try to guess what the blaster was. We ran out of content for that pretty quick, and we've moved on to something new. And the way that this works, we had that one question that was not from a Ko-Fi supporter, and folks can, on the Discord, they can react to a message I send right before every episode and be entered into a raffle to be the person who potentially gets selected to win a free question for our next podcast guest if the current one is able to get 2 out of 3 trivia questions. The trick is we will probably just mess with the game until you get at least 2 out of 3 trivia questions if they're hard. That said, I have 29 people who asked, and I'm going to loudly type random number generator on my thing here, and I'm going to click on random.org, and I'm going to enter 28 because I'm one of those 29 people. No, why is it not working? Here we go. Minimum, max, 28. This is the part where I'm really professional. And we have 18. And so that would be... Oh, no. Show me all 6. Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17. Ninja Man Bob. Ninja Man Bob. Congratulations. If Drac is able to get 2 out of 3 of these trivia questions right, you will have the opportunity to ask our next podcast guest a question. We don't know who that is yet. Our plan is sort of to hang out with people at Maryland Mayhem and sort of figure out who that's going to be there and do sort of a recap of Mayhem with that person. So this episode, we are going to play a 3-question multiple choice trivia game with you called Draconial versus Flygonial. We'll be asking you questions about the designer of the Griffin and Protean. How much do you know about those blasters?
I'm familiar with the Griffin. I am a little bit behind on the Protean, but I remember seeing some pictures of it, and I'd love to make one.
It does look pretty sweet. I actually looked this up. The only time that I could find that you mentioned the Griffin on your channel was your How to Get Started in Nerf 2022 video. You suggested it as one blaster to print yourself.
Huh. Well, I definitely own a couple of them, and I've used them on fair occasion.
Yeah, I believe it. All right, hosts, do we want to do the same? Each of you reads a question. I'll read the last one.
Works for me.
Sure.
Story. Who wants to go first?
I could go first again. Why not? All right. Which of the following was not a feature of Flygonial's 2018 blaster, the Rectify? Was it A, magazine top loading, B, katana magazine compatibility, or C, N-Strike stock attachment point?
Shoot. I'm gonna say in strike stock attachment point.
What? Why? What's your
Because
reasoning?
the other two katanas would have still been a thing around that era. Pop loading sounds like something goofy that would precursor the Griffin being better. And an in strike stock attachment point. If I'm thinking about the same era of Flygonial design, I want to say he was using PVC stocks for most stuff. So I'm not gonna die on that hill. It sounds like I'm wrong.
I mean, it's fine if you're wrong because you still have 2 more questions. But do you want to go with that answer? We can just go with that answer. That's fine.
I mean, I think that I did. It's very kind of you to let me.
We're sticking with that, Vile.
So you're gonna go with C?
I'm going with C. I feel like I've already done it. I think it would be disingenuous
We're
to the
there.
game
We're
to
there.
hop
We've
out.
gone with it.
Okay. So
Oh, I didn't wait. So I didn't mark the correct answers.
you did not. You did
No,
not.
let me do that. Let me do that real quick.
Okay.
Wait. That's wrong. That's not it.
The
That's not
correct
Okay.
answer would be
That's not it.
B. Katana mag compatibility.
Yep.
Yeah, it was full dart only.
Okay. Well,
His first flywheeler was all the long darts.
If I were
in 2018, was that 18 or 16?
2018.
In 2018, I think that most flywheels were performing better with full lengths than half lengths.
Yes.
That maybe makes sense.
I was gonna say most. I mean, even to this day, I still run full length for most flywheelers. I have a few that are half length, but we have much better half length
I
darts.
think by 2018 we were experimenting with like using E-kind waffle tips in a half dart fashion, but the glue didn't work as well. So I think we were
they decapped like
I
crazy.
definitely think we were probably still using full versions at the time.
All right. Well, I'll take my lumps. Maybe question 2 will be more up my alley.
Sure.
All right.
I'll read question 2. In your November 2022 video, How Do You Get Into Nerf 2022, you mentioned the Griffin as an option for a 3D printed bespoke blaster featuring an image of Griffin 1.2 on Flygonial's printable page. What was the color scheme of that Griffin? Was it A, red, black, and orange, your colors, B, blue and orange, Coop's colors, or was it C, pink, blue, and orange, Dauntless colors?
Man, I don't necessarily know if I love this game anymore. I'm gonna default to, and I'll explain my reasoning, but it's gonna be bad. I'm going to say it was black, red, and orange because I feel like if all of those images were in front of me, that's the one I would use. Have I cost your viewer their prize?
Let's see. What I don't know. You want to pick a different one?
I'll take the pity play this time. I'm gonna hope then that it was Dauntless colors.
You would be correct.
All right.
I will say, anyways, from my understanding, you are colorblind, so that makes sense. That
That is very fair. Yeah. Colors and I have a mutual understanding, a difficult relationship.
Yes.
There was also Drac colors on the Thingiverse page as well, but the default image appeared in the video was the pink, blue, and orange one. Yeah.
So you were half correct.
And it's funny because when I was researching these questions, it was like, oh, I see the video, and I go to the printables page, or is it? I said Thingiverse and printables. I forget which one it is, but the page is unchanged because it has not been up. The blaster has not been updated. That particular page, the 1.2, has not been updated since then. Okay, so we're now 1-1. We still have a chance to get this listener a free question. Are you ready for your final question?
Yeah, I'd love to help this guy out.
All right. What other obscure hobby does Flygonial share with skewer and red herring designer Taffy? Is it A, geocaching, B, single-wheeled electric conveyance, or C, Yu-Gi-Oh?
Words cannot even express how much I hope it isn't Yu-Gi-Oh! As somebody who's managed.
The hit was even dropped earlier, and I think this is hilarious.
I think it's single-wheeled conveyance because my memory isn't that bad, so I'm going to assume that they're both one-wheelers.
Correct. Taffy's mostly into one wheels, and Flygonial does electric unicycles. But in the grand scheme of things, basically, effectively the same thing. Flygonial's active in. I discovered this when I was going through again researching these questions. Flygonial's active in a lot of electric unicycle subreddits, and also designed some electric unicycle accessories that are on his principals page.
Huh.
So, with a score of 2 out of 3, congratulations, Drac. You have won a free question for Ninja Man Bob, another user who I have not yet met, but we will be discussing things soon.
Now, if you ever think you did bad, go back and watch or listen to Beret if you ever want to hear a really fun trivia question.
Well, I'm not proud of my performance, but
Berets is probably one of the more comical ones. But
I would say if it makes you feel any better,
incredible.
these questions are supposed to be obscure and kind of put you on the spot. So it's fun
Yeah.
to
sure.
listen.
I mean, Brett is a funny guy. I'm sure he did a much better job.
You just got to go back and listen to it, I think.
I think that after this, I'm definitely going to pick up a couple of episodes. I want to listen to the Xavier one too. That guy's a hoot.
That was a good one. We had a really good conversation. He was the first one that I got to sort of do this breakdown about who you are and who the character is, and he had a lot of really, really interesting things to say. So, moving on a little bit, I want we're kind of moving towards the ending parts of the podcast, but I want a chance to talk with you about the big exciting topic that everybody's talking about, the Nexus and the Aeon Pro X. And you were one of the first content creators to get your hands on it, and I kind of want to just discuss as a group how we think that this is going to be different, if at all, from the Nexus, the original Nexus release, which had this sort of ripple effect in the hobby when it first came out. And especially, in the context of the conversation we just had about the company's responsibilities to the hobby, our responsibilities to the companies, to see something like this that's so clearly geared towards what we do. How will this, with its new accessories and somewhat higher performance, how is this going to be different from the original Nexus?
I think that, in the spirit of fair play, this is a product that's pretty clearly geared towards, competitive shelf positioning versus Zuru as opposed to Hasbro. I mean, I think that Dart Zone established pretty undeniably that at least in the performance category, they had the best thing on the shelf for a very long period of time. And then Zuru comes out with the long shot, which is a terrific blaster. Just an awesome piece of foam flinging equipment. A lot of the things that I think you could say negatively about it are so overshadowed by the price point being just as incredible as it is. The Nexus Pro X, the Aeon Pro X sort of seek to answer that and be like, okay, at the original $25-50 price point, what's changed in the last 4 or 5 years? What are they capable of doing or delivering on a better level here? And then what's the ripple effect of that going to be, I suppose? I got my hands on the prototypes in Nuremberg, which was super exciting. I was not actually expecting to see them at Nuremberg, so I was delighted that they were there, and then also that they had samples to share. A lot of the business that I did in Nuremberg was, very top-level NDA, leave your camera in a felt baggie at the front kind of stuff. So it was very, it was good to see a company that's been good to us in the past and that I've worked with closely on various projects. That was like, yeah, put a camera out, film some stuff. That was awesome. But at the $25 price point, the Aeon Pro X is unbelievable. And then the Nexus, I think that they really captured that lightning again, where it's like you could have a full loadout for $60. It's, a better product than its predecessor in basically every capacity. It's feature rich in a way that, a lot of the default mod stuff that we were doing to the Nexus or the Aeon is no longer necessary.
Right.
It's cross compatible with more things. It's half-link dedicated, which just shows that, like, they took a look at what worked and what didn't, and they were like, hey, the half-link space is good enough, is important enough, exciting enough, dynamic enough that we can support it entirely.
People are so much more ready to adopt directly into half darts than they were, I think, when the original Nexus came out.
Yeah.
Well, and I think
and that's a lot of what I want to try to get at here too. Is like, what is the context for a product like this to show up now is so different than the context was for the original Nexus.
Well, I mean, I think that these products couldn't exist in 2018, 2019 because the market never would support them, retail never would support what it is, which is effectively a piece of sporting equipment designed to, really up the ante of your play into this high speed, long range engagement thing. I mean, it's just, if I could go back 14 years and tell, baby Drac nerfer that this was the kind of thing that you could pick up off the shelf, you just simply wouldn't believe it. And I'm excited to be a part of the hobby that's come from that place to this place. I'm excited to see where it goes from there. I think that, largely in the same way that I'm like, well, the Strife-X comes out, we chew it up, we spit it out. Hasbro's like, yeah, we're not doing that again. That seeing, in this case, Zuru and Dart Zone go to war with each other to make better, cheaper product is really, I mean, like, if we're not the winners of that, I don't know who is. It's like Godzilla versus Kong, right? I mean, like, we get an awesome show no matter who wins, and there's going to be a lot of great stuff for us to enjoy along the way. So I'm excited that they're getting into the hands of reviewers outside of a trade show. I hope that I can find some at a Walmart down here in the Dirty South pretty soon. But everything that I saw on the shelf, and ever since the Omni, I'm a little hesitant. I want to see production blasters as opposed to pre-production samples. Right. But I think it's a terrific product. And, I'm not so much thinking of that in terms of, like, for me or for, like, one of my competitive teammates or something, because at this point we've got highly tuned loadouts. It's more about
how it impacts the random person showing up who just bought their first blaster.
Yeah, I mean, I just think that this makes, 18-year-old newcomer to Nerf.org on a college campus, who maybe only has $50. I think that this is just an incredible product for them. I think that it's amazing for Timmy, who just turned 13, and this is his birthday present, and it opens him up to a whole world of, like, wow, dude, like, Nerf guns are hardcore, man.
Even scars bear, like, the two different scars being offered with them is also, like, I mean, that's
they're giving you the rough equivalent of a hobby-based, like, a Foam Pro Shop $20 kit upgrade
off the shelf,
free in the box.
Yeah, it's
ready to go. It's
really impressive.
It's really cool. And, as excited as I am for it, and I genuinely am excited to see what people do in terms of mods, paint jobs, etc., I'm equally excited to see what people do in terms of, I want to know what Zuru's answer to this is. Next year at Nuremberg, I want to know if, Zuru is, not to reveal anything necessarily, but, I'm sure there will be an answer. And it's a very exciting time to be a foam flinger. I think that we're getting more product that's catered towards our genre of play than ever before. And, the ready availability of that off the shelf makes it easier to go to events. It makes it easier to have enough darts. I mean, I can't even express, like, I genuinely almost cried the first time I bought a pack of 100 darts at a Walmart before an event, because I have to think about, like, how a dart used to be like a minute and a half of my time. Like, it was staying up the night before with your buddies, drinking Coca-Colas, putting Steffens together, and then waiting for hot glue to dry. It was a completely different world. Now we get a full night's sleep, and we have more darts than we can shoot. So it's really cool.
It's funny how fast things change in situations like this. Unless Grim, I don't know if Grim, you wanna jump in on that at all?
I guess the thing I would say is I just think it's neat because in both the same way that it'll affect hobbyists, I think it's going to definitely affect new people. Something I've seen with younger audiences that have shown up to wars or shown up to local arenas, in my area at the very least, is with the original Nexus, because it was still compatible with full-length darts. Their parents oftentimes are just willing to get whatever ammo is compatible with the new thing at this point, because they're familiar to the Ultra, the Mega, the full-length dart, and all this other stuff that's like different blasters take different things. So little Timmy, who got like the Nexus for his birthday, he saw it took full-length magazines like his other Nerf blasters, and then he just threw away the 12 half-length darts, because in his mind, if he had to go ask his parents, hey, can you go get these smaller darts? They'd say, can't it already take your other ones? So they just didn't want to lose them, so they'd either stash them away or they'd throw them away. They never touched the half-length dart. But now that we have a Nexus X and an Aeon, I believe the Aeon is also half-length only, but I could be wrong on that from misremembering. With the Nexus X, at the very least, being half-length only, it gives them something to experiment with and actually a reason to kind of try the whole half-dart thing. I know someone who had gotten a Nexus and was apprehensive of half-length darts for the longest time since I had been using flywheelers, eventually come to couple experiences and events, and then eventually Endwar 2022, seeing all of the half-dart usage, I was just like, well, I'm really behind. I really need to just dive into this half-length thing, and I really haven't looked back since.
And that's a really important point, too, I think, because this is the thing I always loop back to with my background in music education, where you have kids come in and there's the kid who is renting a decent violin for their lessons, and there's the kid whose parents were like, oh, but I can buy one on Amazon for $80, and that thing is effectively unplayable. Which of those is more likely to wind up taking the instrument seriously? And we have that situation in this hobby where that's why I started my YouTube channel in the first place, was to try to communicate directly with parents, because that is the continuation of the hobby. You know, Drac, early you said children of the future, half jokingly, but obviously truly. Like,
no, I mean, coming
is the
from
next
the
step of the
perspective
hobby.
Of somebody who ran, I ran the SENC with a group of people for a very long time. I ran it by myself for 3 or 4 years there. I just handed it off to an incredible mod staff down there.
Well, and I'm sure you see a lot of kids come there and that's their first experience nerfing, and if they show up with something that is not, even in a casual play situation, that's just not ever going to net them a tag, or that's going to be jamming constantly.
Well, it's the same thing I was talking about, and I don't mean to speak over you, I apologize.
No, you're good.
Your job as an organizer is to foster that feeling of, wow, that was cool. And you know, right or wrong, if the child or the teenager, the new nerfers, experience is baseline, you know, they've experienced blasters off the shelf, yada yada, but their knowledge base is not quite as high as yours. It's undeniable that something off the shelf like the long shot from Zuru or the new Nexus Pro, or, you know, a skewer, anything from Worker, like something along that line. It gives that real like snap pop wow moment. And like, if you can create enough moments like that for that new player throughout the course of that event or that day, that's what, you know, gets them involved and keeps them in the hobby and grows the entire ecosystem. And, you know, I've said this a few times. I made a morale patch that I used to send to my patrons back in the day. But, you know, the rising tide raises all boats. And if your group isn't growing, if it's not bringing new participants into it on a regular basis, then it's actively dying. So, you know, I see groups like the New York Nerf Ops guys doing an amazing job of fostering new people in a very public place and bringing more and more people into the sport and into the hobby, and I absolutely love that. But I think that more exciting entry-level gear that we're super comfortable loaning out to people and, try and break it or whatever is, because, you know, your veteran might be hesitant to let you use his very tuned special Caliburn that, you know, that's his race car, right? Like, that's the extension of him. But, you know, if he has a Nexus Pro X in the bag and it gets you tags and it gives you that feeling of wow, that excitement of participating on a very real level, then that's the goal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that's a really important perspective on that. And I hope that people trying to run their own clubs, get your friends together, do what you need to do, but it's important, I think, to recognize this stuff as people start to come to you for the first time. You are the ambassador for the hobby. Like that is what people see. And so
Whether you signed up to be or not, if you're the
Whether you
first
signed up
person
to
that
be
gets
or not.
asked what's going on here,
Yeah.
it's your job now.
And one great way to show the face of our hobby, in my opinion, is to wear bright colors. So I want to close with a little quick roundtable question.
Oh, it's so good.
Real quick roundtable question here. Silver Fox and Containment Crew just launched SCRD. We covered this in the show. Brightly colored tactical gear, something I think our hobby has needed for so long because we occupy this weird space between like wanting Molly on everything and also wanting to party and be super visible and not desert camo all the time. Currently, they're making a tack belt, a bandolier, talon holders, dump pouches, I think like a phone pouch or something, right, Grim? You did the coverage on this.
Yeah, there's a phone pouch, a battle belt, dump pouch, a almost invert style bandolier, and there are ball detent mag holders.
Right, the ball detent on the mag holder, it looks really great. I think we pretty much all know what color everybody in this room wants from them. The Kickstarter has already successfully gone through orange, blue, purple, and pink. Red is next, and then we're all voting at Maryland Mayhem for bright green. Right, we're voting for the brighter green.
Yeah, which color green? There's two. There's a slightly darker and then a brighter one. I'm
everybody
voting for bright.
is voting for the bright green.
That's right. You better
just making that clear. But what I want to ask the group, and let's just kind of go around real quick, what other kinds of gear would you like to see them produce in these bright colors?
I already got my answer.
Do it.
All right, so I am a leg holster or leg like gear. I personally, because just the way that I am, I don't like things on my chest. Belts are okay, but I tend to notice that if I have to crouch down, like if I have mags in that or a dump pouch, it tends to fold in a weird way. Anything that goes on the legs, I would be like a drop leg type of thing. Whether it's holster or, like I said, for talon mags, that's what I want. I specifically want leg type of stuff.
The sidearm leg holster.
Kind of, yeah.
Absolutely key. Absolutely.
Even if
key.
if I could do it where it's actually talon mags are in that's on the leg, that would also be perfect because a talon mag would fit perfect on your thigh area. Like that's not too long. Whether it's like a 15 round or even a Coda mag might be just pushing it, but something like that would be perfect for me and just my play style.
My answer is kind of almost the exact same. I was going to also say like leg panel stuff. I absolutely love my scabbard rig, but I've also started to notice that the number one time someone asks me what kind of gear you use and I answer the scabbard rig, they're like, those aren't always available. What do I do now? So if there was at least something that was half as good that I could recommend it as an alternative.
No, I mean, if it was half as good or for half the price, like I would have made it already. So I'm thrilled to watch other people do drop leg gear. I mean, I don't want to parrot the whole thing, but I think that I'm in the same boat where like I want. It's not a secret. I didn't manufacture the scabbard rig. I worked very hard to get the best in the world to make the scabbard rig, but I get the same question all the time. Like, what do you use? Why can't I have one? If we could get something that was half as good at a quarter of the price, I'd sing its praises ad nauseum.
Yeah. The other like addendum, I guess, to make it like slightly different, make it mid-ride. Make it mid-ride. That's the number one thing I hear from people who have had a scabbard rig that like, what could they do to improve it? Mid-ride. That would be the thing.
I will. So I definitely want drop leg stuff, y'all. Definitely hit that. I have a feeling, honestly, that is probably what they will do next if they add more things to this line. But a little bit more out there, one thing that I have really loved running, particularly in HVZ situations or places where I'm doing like game-based or like puzzle-solving stuff in addition to play, is I'll wear my lever action Saturn on a backpack. What do you call that? I guess a scabbard. What is that? Anyway, like a backpack shotgun holder.
Oh.
I would love one of those in a bright color. I have all this like pink and blue duct tape all over mine because the like least black color I could get was, like I said, like a desert camo. I would love something like that. Slightly higher ticket item probably, but I would go for it. real hard. And I don't think I'm the only one. It's probably not as popular as the drop leg stuff, but people will go for it. It's a fun way to run if you haven't tried it.
I think the only other like the other like thing that immediately comes to mind that isn't currently there, I think a lot of people probably want attack vest or plate carrier, like full size kind of thing outside of the more invert style. You see a lot of competitive players really like the more invert style bandolier, but a lot of HVZ goers and other people really prefer the full vest.
Some people just want the maximum.
Exactly.
Capacity.
They want to carry every mag that their body surface can allow them to carry.
Those are the heavies. Yeah, the ammo carriers.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
And then you have Bobo, who
Oh.
carries a shit ton just by all of his surplus gear that he insists is still the latest and greatest ever.
He's literally the designated heavy. He told me recently, the jury's out. He says that he might come to Endwar, do kind of a fire sale of some of his old stuff. And
So the other thing on that, the Kickstarter had a stretch goal. Bobo comes to Endwar, and that's already been met. So whether he wanted to or not, the decision has
I
it's
guess
set
he's
in stone
going.
now. Yes.
I guess he's going. If he's gonna be selling off some of his old stuff, because I'm a project that I'm bringing to. Actually, well, I'll talk about this as we outro here. But one of the things I'm bringing to Mayhem is I'm sort of starting this. I'm trying this idea of doing some preservation of items that are important to hobby history, and I have a handful of things that I think are worth keeping, and I'd love to add one of Bobo's blasters to that and bring it to events so people can actually see it and experience it. So might need to try to get out there and see if I can grab something off of him. But with that, I think we're ready to wrap this one up. Drac, thank you so much for coming on and taking the time to talk with us about Endwar and things far beyond that. Would you please tell the folks, even though, again, pretty sure everybody listening to this podcast knows where they can find you, but specifically maybe tell them where to find Endwar.
So Endwar has a new website this year. It's long overdue. We should have done it a while ago, but we're finally getting up to date. And Endwar's website is hvzendwar.com. If you'd like to participate in Endwar, that's your primary landing page. It links to this, but we also have foamprotour.com. That's your hub for competitive cash-based prizes. So those two websites are going to be the primary distribution hub for both player information and accommodations and scheduling going forward. We intend to use that instead of Facebook groups or Discord groups to do things like disseminate mission videos and what have you. I mean, these are all very lofty goals for our volunteer staff over here, but that is the sincere hope. You can find me on the internet. Someday I'll start streaming again. I am physically findable at DragonCon and Endwar. Those are the two points in time where no matter what else is going on in my business or my life, I'm always good for a cold drink at Endwar or DragonCon.
Nice. All right, killer. Well, thanks again for coming on, Vile and Grim. What you got going on? As usual, I guess Vile is probably streaming if you're listening to this right now.
Nope.
Oh no, you're not.
I'll be at
Because
Maryland with you.
We will be in Maryland. What am I talking about?
We'll be at Maryland with you.
No, that's right. We're gonna turn this off, and Vile and I are gonna go finish packing.
Yeah, basically.
JK, I have to upload the podcast. I guess.
True.
Too. Grim, what you got going on? Or do you want to say bye to the folks?
I guess I'll just say bye, and I guess I'll be making episode thumbnails as soon as I'm done with this.
Yeah, I need you to record something too.
Okay.
Anyway, thanks for listening, everybody. You know where to find us. Have a good night.
Thanks for having me, guys. Bye.
Thank you.